The legend of Merlin and Arthur, Camelot, and the Knights of the Round Table is one that has been told many times and likely will continue to be, but the one I wish to speak of is a 3-part TV miniseries from 1998 simply titled Merlin. It doesn't help with distinctions that there's a second Merlin series also from 1998 also called Merlin, so to be clear I'm referring to the one starring Sam Neill. While officially a 3-part miniseries, each part is about an hour long, so I think it would more accurately be described as a 3-hour movie. Merlin is based on the classic Arthurian legend, but also heavily mixes in elements of Celtic folklore. The movie tells the epic tale of Merlin's pursuit of love and his lifelong struggle against Queen Mab, a prominent figure amongst the realm's magical creatures and an iconic character to those who believe in the old ways. Merlin does many things very well. It's an entertaining, epic fairy tale of history and true love, but the reason I wanted to discuss it is because I think it's a great example of how limitations can bring out the best in writing. Before that, I'll cover the general story and themes of Merlin. Queen Mab and the rest of the magical race's existence literally depend on people believing in them, along with magic itself. Without believers, magic and mythical creatures will disappear. The pagan old ways are being usurped by the encroachment of Christianity, and this threatens to erase Mab and her ilk.
If people stop believing in us, we won't exist. The new religion has already pushed us to the brink.
She devises a plan to raise a human from birth, Merlin, to great magical heights so that he can be a rallying figure and restore the old religion. Mab is desperate and takes an ends justify the means approach. She's self-centered, cares nothing for anything that doesn't serve her own interests, and is willing to do anything to achieve them. Mab uses her magic to instigate the birth of Merlin, but allows his mother to die in childbirth because she doesn't see any value in keeping her alive.
Why didn't you save her?
She'd served her purpose.
She treats her subordinates and the few humans who still worship her as disposable tools. While she says she loves Merlin, she really only views him as a pawn to enable her own self-preservation. Mab's callousness eventually causes Merlin to turn against her. While he does harbor a grudge against her, he would be content to live a simple life of peace and love, but Mab's repeated interference prevents him from doing so. In his youth, he falls in love with a traveling lord's daughter, Nimue, but Mab's actions conspire to keep them apart in different ways throughout his life. The movie, being a telling of Arthurian legend, has many of the characters you would expect to appear, such as Arthur, Guinevere, and Sir Lancelot, but the story is primarily a battle between Merlin and Mab. The country is beleaguered by war, and Merlin and Mab settle into their roles as opposing puppet masters, attempting to one-up each other by influencing events and battling by proxy. The movie has a strong theme of morally complicated characters and isn't afraid to show its supposed heroes doing very questionable things.
How great is your power? Can you make a woman love me?
Could you kill her husband? Igraine, I want her, Merlin.
Well, you can't have her.
Give me Igraine.
She's not mine to give.
Then I'll take her.
Even if it means war.
It will.
So be it.
He hardly had the crown on his head before it began all over again.
Merlin backs one king against another, tyrannical one, only for the supposedly good king he backed to turn around and succumb to vice, putting his own pleasures before the good of the people.
Good king, bad king. You judge too easily, Merlin. You'll learn.
At times, Merlin resorts to the same ends justify the means approach as Mab and even mirrors a lot of her actions.
You helped him seduce my mother and destroyed me.
The story has many repeating events which parallel each other. For example, Merlin's birth is orchestrated and his true lineage is kept from him until he matures, whereupon he's removed from his home to serve another's purpose. Merlin does the exact same thing to Arthur, and events later repeat again with Arthur's son Mordred. Where the movie shines most is in its writing, and specifically how budget limitations worked to bring out its best. Merlin was made for TV on a budget of around $30 million, which isn't small, especially by 1998 standards, but is low relative to traditional big-budget Hollywood movies. Merlin has an all-star cast and makes good use of sets, costumes, and props. Still, watching the movie, I often felt it was struggling against a limited budget. Given that, you would think the movie would keep special effects to a minimum, but Merlin has a ton. The movie is smart and uses its special effects intelligently. It knows when and where to use them, cleverly utilizing editing and visual trickery.
Watch.
Budget-wise, Merlin is at its worst when it needs to display large-scale battles and CG. Battles, which should include hundreds of soldiers, have maybe 20 or 30 on each side. The CG creatures look occasionally awful, which is especially strange since other CG characters look great. But ultimately, any lacking aspects of the special effects are more than made up for by great writing. The bigger point I'm making is that the movie's limitations, specifically budget in this case, forced the creators to think shrewdly and make choices that bolstered story and characters over displays of spectacle, although the movie's limitations could be a result of time and not budget.
Production began on the Merlin miniseries just 6 months before its scheduled air date.
I think there's often a misconception about how creativity is fostered. Limitations aren't the enemy of creativity, but are in fact its impetus. Digressing for a moment, Mark Rosewater has been the lead designer of Magic the Gathering, a game I'm an avid player of, for 18 years. An expert in game design, he's most famous for his saying,
"Restrictions breed creativity." I write a weekly design column known as Making Magic. So some weeks are theme weeks. I have to write to a theme. It's Goblin Week or whatever. I have to write about goblins. Some weeks are open-ended. I can write whatever I want. Which is harder to write? The theme week or the open-ended week? The open-ended week. Because the theme week forced my hand and make me explore options I might not. So there's a myth about creativity that the more options available, the more creative people can be. But this actually contradicts how we know how most brains work. So when you're asked to solve a problem, it checks its data banks and it asks itself, have I solved this problem before? And if the answer is yes, it solves it in the exact same way. So what it does is it uses the same neural pathways and does exactly what you did before. Now most of the time this is efficient. It lets you avoid relearning tasks each time you do them. But it causes a problem with creative thought, because if you use the same neural pathways, you get to the same answers. And with creativity, that's not your goal. Start from somewhere you've never started before. This is forcing me to think in different ways and create new problems to solve, which results in new ideas and new solutions, which means that restrictions aren't an obstacle, but a valuable tool. So you can make use of restrictions to help you be more creative. So once again, I can't stress enough. Having restrictions. In fact, if you don't have restrictions, make restrictions.
While he's specifically talking about game design, I think this advice applies to any creative endeavor. Many high-budget productions are more concerned with wowing an audience with spectacle and forget that good writing is the heart of any story. So for example, it wasn't a problem for me that this CG dragon looks awful because I was invested in Merlin and Nimue, if they would escape or how they would defeat it, whereas other stories are content to let spectacle compensate for lack of good writing. Good writing can make up for bad visuals, but great visuals don't make up for bad writing.
And it'll be something that that will have a sort of magical element that you won't really have seen before.
If you haven't seen Merlin 1998, I highly recommend it. I'd like to speak briefly about some details I wanted to bring up earlier but didn't find a way to fit into the main body of this video. I have some nitpicks regarding the logic of magic powers and characters' plans. For example, why Queen Mab even needs to create Merlin in the first place. If she wants believers, couldn't she just demonstrate her incredible magical powers herself? The worst things get are when Arthur makes a rival lord have a change of heart by letting him hold Excalibur and feeling the moral rightness of it. In general though, I think a lot of these problems can be hand-waved as minor issues or not needing to stick to strict logic in a fairy tale. At one point, Merlin's love, Nimue, is burned and receives scars on her hand and face. Nimue is insecure about her appearance and, for a long time, doesn't want to be with Merlin or go out in society. I like how the movie commits to making them look like real, ugly scars that a real person might feel insecure about, whereas many other movies wimp out with minor physical imperfections that would be no big deal in real life but which they treat as ghastly. Finally, there was a sequel to Merlin titled Merlin's Apprentice, released in 2006, 8 years after the original. Though Sam Neill reprises his role as Merlin, it's a very different movie, ignores the original film's continuity, and is nothing special. Thank you for watching.